I do really want to say that enabling group is a really important space. It's a really important gathering for us as staff, I think for us as trustees, for the life and the work of the ecumenical instrument. And it's always for me a reminder of the balance that we're trying to strike, a weighing up, as it were. If you were all Pentecostals, for example, I think we'd have different types of work that we'd be engaged in. If you were all Orthodox, we'd have different types of work streams. And so we're constantly navigating a path that draws on the gifts and ministry of each of our member churches. And to be honest, it's much easier to do unity when you're not as diverse. When we all kind of agree on stuff. But our diversity is both our Achilles heel and our greatest gift to each other and to the world. And I think we need to be honest about the plurality of voices that we represent, but also rejoice in that. One of my reflections in Finland and Sweden was that if you look at their National Council of Churches, they're really not that diverse. They're mostly made up of historical denominations. But within CTE, we have 23 charismatic and Pentecostal churches. We have 11 Orthodox churches. And so that's something to rejoice in and to understand as a gift, something that is precious, that we offer not only to each other, to the life of the church in the UK or in England, but to the world. My theological reflection is on the work of our charities and networks and associations. So I've entitled it The Role of CNAs in Ecumenism, Receptivity, Reimagination, Renegotiation. Churches together in England have a great range of charities and networks who are in association with us. And over the past 7 to 10 years, we've seen a rise in the membership of our CNAs, formerly known as bodies and association. And the vast majority of charities that have joined us in the past decade or so have been ecumenical by happy accident, rather than ecumenical by design. And increasingly, many of our CNAs have a evangelical heritage or have Pentecostal roots. And this supposed theological reflection is, I guess, if I'm honest, not very theological, but more of an opportunity for you as representatives of member churches to do the reflecting. How do we relate to parachurch organisations? How can our member churches make the most of the gifts of the charities and networks that we have in association? How may we encourage, strengthen and resource churches' work? I think it's important to clarify right at the outset that whilst charities and networks and association do not form part of the official structures, as voluntary associations of Christians or movements within the church, they are recognised and valued for their participation in the church's mission and in ecumenism. Our charities and networks in association build relationships. They increase understanding of what it means to be ecumenical. They often exhibit lived ecumenism in action, on the ground in local settings. CNAs offer churches a rich range of resources, of partnerships, of focus. They serve the church's ever greater unity, often from a point of direct engagement with changing conditions and needs of wider society. Their insights also offer a refreshing addition to churches united, working on the ground, creating new space for the church's voice to be heard in the public sphere. And the areas of focus of our charities and networks and association are wide-ranging. They include church life, mission and apologetics, public affairs, justice and peace, environment and sustainable development, children and work in schools, students and young people, Christian discipleship and formation, health, social and pastoral care, community building, prayer and spirituality, dialogue and ecumenical learning, international concerns and development. And given the increase of our CNAs over the past 7 years, I thought it might be helpful at the outset for you to get an idea who is actually part of our CNAs grouping. So I've called it Who's Who in the Zoo. Who are our actual charities in association at CTE? A few years ago, myself and John Cooper, who was the chair at the time, attempted to kind of categorise CNAs. We decided to categorise them into 6 groupings. And of course, there are all sorts of ways of categorising things. There's such a broad range, multiple dimensions, and many of our charities and networks operate in more than one sphere or category. But let's have a look at a few. And I've named them, firstly, ecumenical learning, secondly, social justice, social action, campaigning on specific issues, 3, evangelism, mission and church planting, 4, professional associations and chaplaincy, 5, young people, community and education, and number 6, theological institutions. So let's look at the first one, ecumenical learning. This first category set ecumenical encounter and reciprocal learning at the heart of their work. In many instances, these are some of our older CNAs who've been in membership for a long time. But a recently joined member, I think, who exemplify this is the Lausanne Orthodox Initiative, a movement of Orthodox and evangelical Christians who wish to respect each other's beliefs, learn from each other, and support one another as they each obey the call to share in God's mission. They meet roughly once a year in a different part of the world and reflect constructively on the history of relationships between Orthodox and evangelicals, encouraging reconciliation and healing where wounds exist. Established after the Lausanne Conference in Cape Town in 2010. And I will be joining, along with John, 50, and Natasha, 50 evangelicals and Orthodox from across the world just outside Cairo at the Logos Center in early November. Other examples are the Society for Ecumenical Studies, who we work with closely, or the Association of Interchurch Families, who you'll hear from later. CTE has worked in partnership with the Society for Ecumenical Studies to help broaden our work around racial justice. For example, in May this year, leaders, theologians, ecumenists, and diaspora church voices gathered at London's Jesuit Centre for an inaugural conference called The Gift of My Neighbour, Learning from Diaspora Communities. The conference aimed to be a bold and timely exploration of migration, neighbourliness, and the theological riches found in churches with roots beyond the UK. And I'm sure each of you will agree how important and timely this is in our current landscape. These charities and networks are constituted with ecumenical principles at their heart. They seek to build bridges, to bring deeper understanding, heal wounds, and continue pilgrimage along the way together. Then we have social justice, social action, and campaigning on specific issues. This second category of charity has a focus on specific areas or causes. For example, the Fellowship of Reconciliation is a member-led movement of Christians committed to peace, justice, and non-violence. They provide education, campaign, and offer solidarity opportunities and help people explore their understanding of peace and take action to build a more peaceful world. or the number of charities focused on poverty alleviation or eradication of debt relief and money justice issues. Charities like Christians Against Poverty, Church Action on Poverty, Trussell, Community Money Advice, Just Money Movement, and Oiko Credit. These organisations find their ecumenical life emerges from solidarity and action. Ecumenical encounter is, in a sense, a byproduct of their work, often bringing surprising connections with parts of the wider church that have not been prefigured. I was reminded just how dynamic this can be at our recent in-person gathering of CNAs last Thursday in our offices in London. 30 different charities came together for the day to think about avoiding competition, building mission and engagement. And Pete Morey from Christian Aid spoke. And whilst the content was excellent and the Q&A was lively, the breakout groups were stimulating. What I found most fascinating were the conversations I was overhearing in the cracks during the coffee break over lunch as people began to pursue connections. Charities deciding to plan a podcast together on an area of equal concern on climate crisis. People exchanging details and numbers. A representative of a mega charity with millions of pounds of annual income and turnover, hearing the story of a small, struggling charity, providing a simple service in almost unseen ways. Thirdly, in the category of evangelism, mission, and church planting. These are charities and networks which have at their heart a mandate for sharing the good news of Jesus. And this may be through encouraging the wider church to join in the mission of God, training people in evangelism, creating resources for discipleship, or church planting. And an example of a more recent charity and network and association is Fresh Expressions of Church. I happen to be on the leadership community. It's a movement now celebrating 21 years. It's seen many hundreds of new churches birthed through the process of prayer, listening, and service in governed contexts. And in a good number of cases, these churches have been ecumenical. They can be found on new housing estates, in rural contexts or urban centres. Bishop Stephen Croft says, "A fresh expression is a form of church for our changing culture, established primarily for the benefit of people who are not yet members of any church." Other agencies like the Church Mission Society or USPG have long histories of mission activity in other parts of the globe, but now encourage Christians in the UK to think about mission on their doorsteps. CMS provides training for lay and ordained pioneers working all over the UK. Then we have professional associations and chaplaincy. This fourth category is professional associations and chaplaincy, which bring together those who work in a particular profession and have associated together to find support, encouragement, networking, and professional development. Recent examples might be the Retreat Association or the Christian Police Association or the Association of Church Accounting and Members. Others like sports chaplaincy or workplace chaplaincy that offer training and support. Chaplaincy work is obviously an ecumenical and often an interfaith endeavour too. We have a number of organisations that support chaplains in all sorts of contexts. And then fifthly, there's young people community and education. Our fifth category focused on young people, community and education. Examples of this might be Action for Children, Transforming Lives for Good, the brilliant work of KIC, all these organisations set the idea of bringing hope and a future to struggling children at the centre of their work. And finally, a category that's currently quite small but potentially could grow as the landscape of theological education changes and is reshaped in the UK. So that gives you an idea of the range of CNAs. Did you know that there were so many? No, yes. Well, I'm not sure, Ben. We didn't know there were any. We have many in membership, but more are joining each year. You had at this AGM 8 new charities and networks and associations. This past week I've had 3 conversations with people who want to join. St. Paul, in his letter to the church at Corinth, uses an important metaphor that you will have all be very familiar with, to speak about the life of community of believers together. In 1 Corinthians 12:12, Paul writes to the local church using the human body as a metaphor, reminding them that some are Jews, some are Gentiles, some are slaves, some are free, but all are baptized into Christ and therefore into the mission of Christ. Think about your body for a moment. Touch your elbow. There you go, you've got an elbow. Touch your eyebrows. Your big toe. I just don't want to watch you do this. Or your shoulder blade. That's quite difficult depending which bit you touch. And if the ear says, I am not part of the body because I am not an eye, would it make it any less part of the body? Perhaps it's too much of a stretch to suggest that we employ a similar metaphor amongst churches, charities, networks, and agencies. The church is a foretaste of the coming kingdom. It is not complete in and of itself. Charities are not the church, but they may offer something to the church. They may be a prophetic reminder about an area of urgent need. They may have skills in training and advocacy that the church lacks. Agencies and networks connect people. They're like the sinews. They create resources. They can advocate. They can draw people together for a particular cause or issue. So there is, therefore, a degree of receptivity in the constellation of member churches, charities, networks, and agencies that have different charisms, that we may learn from one another. In the field of receptive ecumenism, there is a fundamental commitment to be with one another, to listen, to reflect, and appreciate what others have to offer, both individuals, ecclesial communities, and charities. The generous God scatters gifts amongst his people for their edification and mutual sharing. In accepting the gifts, people are drawn into a deeper life with the one true giver. So I want us to turn now in our tables for a moment and consider this simple question. Oh, sorry, I hadn't skipped on. As member church representatives, what do you appreciate about the charities and networks in association at CTE? What gifts do they, have they, could they bring to you? Over the past 7 years, the number of charities who've come into membership with CTE has increased quite significantly. And there, I think, are a number of reasons for that. The first one, I think, is what I'd call the pandemic effect. I think I've got a slide for this. Yeah, the pandemic effect. Yeah, don't read it, just look at it. Thank you. It's like being in school. I think it's the pandemic effect. For all its strange weirdness, and discombobulating effects, it actually helped some charities and some charity leaders to think about their spheres of connection and influence. When we were all reduced to connecting via Zoom calls, WhatsApp, waving at our neighbours across the street, banging pots for the NHS, I think it revealed to some people the poverty of their connections and the poverty of their diversity, or the smallness of their circle. It was interesting. At the time I was beginning to do more of the kind of charities and networks in association with our former boss, Paul Goodliff. And people were emailing saying, well, we've been at home, we're online, and we've seen this thing called CTE, can we have a conversation? The second factor I want to call the mic effect. Now, I'm not trying to score any points with my boss. But I do think it is an anomaly. In the history of CTE, all the general secretaries since the formation in 1990 have been church leaders with quite traditional ecumenical pedigree. Bill, Paul, David were all, in a sense, typical ecclesiastical diplomats and very effective too. Bishop Mike, besides being a senior Pentecostal leader, I think brings this significant experience in the charity sector in a way that other general secretaries just haven't. That's just the reality. And in a sense, we're seeing the fruit of Mike's background because people know Mike and they say they can see the power of connection. So I think the truth is that charities want to be connected to a wider understanding of the church. And many of us are curious about the richness of the church in England, not of England, outside their typical Anglican or Baptist or Methodist or whatever experience. Finally, I think that there's been potentially more openness from charities that have what I call an evangelical heritage, but perhaps in the past felt more hesitant about joining an organisation like CTE, which is rooted in breadth of traditions and theologies. It's also likely that there's more pragmatism around, that there is the effect of what I call local missional ecumenism. So it's what the working together on the ground to meet the needs of the poorest in a particular community, or finding ways of supporting children and young people in that community. And they may have some theological differences on some things, but they can all agree that the Imago Dei is revealed in each person. So the number of charities and networks has grown to around 100 from a wide range of places with a wide range of gifts. But in a sense, we need to think about the future. The CNAs in the past, I think, have often operated quite independently of CTE, and that was not necessarily a bad thing, that was just the reality. But there's a sense in which, because the staff of CTE have been proactive in working with them, they've been brought back into the fold, as it were. And this has, I think, really particularly changed over the last 4 years. We offer some administrational support. We help with organising venues, fixing up food, considering themes and topics to gather around. I now lead on the process of charities and networks coming into membership. I'm the first port of call, so if they don't join, it's my fault. With vital support from Ben and Lorraine and Bishop Mike. We are closer, but how might we want to or need to reimagine some of this relationship? What is it that CTE can offer to CNAs, both old and new? Let me suggest 3 things, bearing in mind our limited capacity as a small staff team. I think one is about sort of general ecumenical literacy. Whilst as I said, the original members of bodies and associations, as they were then called, were largely made up of organisations that had, for want of a better expression, ecumenism pulsing through their veins. More recent members tend to be much less ecumenically aware. They may be involved in ecumenical partnerships at local level or be very effective, but understanding the wider landscape, having a knowledge of the actual range of national churches can sometimes be limited. And so that's why it was brilliant to have Father Dragos with us at the All Ecumenical Representatives, because he helped to unpack what's the difference between Eastern and Oriental Orthodox. How did the ecumenical story of the 20th century unfold? Who are the key protagonists? How did the Pentecostal church grow and change in Britain with the Windrush generation, and why? I think CTE, in partnership with our member churches, can play a role in ecumenical education and literacy. And I meet many charity and networks and associations coming into membership who really value that. They want to learn and they want to be connected to a larger range of the church. They want to be connected to the true church in England, which is not just the historic church. I think we have a role in connecting the national, the intermediate, and the local. We can help charities to understand the ecology of the ecumenical landscape. Who relates to who, and how, and why not? The kind of overlapping territories, how a diocese overlaps with regions or districts or synods. Our bird's eye view means that we can see how things fit together. We can offer advice about who to speak to. We can encourage CNAs to think about the ecumenical dimension of what they're doing and how to live into it. I had a long conversation with a CEO of a charity a few weeks ago, £1 million, turnover every year, how they might approach people at intermediate and local levels because they want to run some pilot projects. But it wasn't because they weren't interested, they just didn't understand what the ecology of this is, who relates to who and how and why. And I think we can offer that, not just as staff, but our national ecumenical officers, those of you who represent different churches, those of you who have roles in other organisations. I think we can help see the bigger picture, again, in British and European and global ecumenical circles. Our charities and networks, I think, want to be part of CTE because of the breadth that we represent. We try not to be partisan. We represent roughly 85% of all Christians in the English context. We can give broad brushstrokes about the concerns of churches in general. We can offer our reflections on what is happening, we think, in Europe or globally via our connections with KEC, or World Council of Churches. And it's wonderful to have Natasha here from Global Christian Forum. We particularly believe the future will be much more about relational ecumenism, about interpersonal relationships between senior leaders rather than institutional ecumenism, which in many ways, in some settings, is beginning to crumble for all sorts of reasons, whether it's financial or whether it's around institutional power. We can give ideas about where ecumenical life is flourishing and where it's struggling. So I want to ask you a question as representatives of member churches this afternoon. What should CTE be doing to help CNAs? And what should CTE be doing to help member churches relate better to CNAs. I've made some suggestions, but what role do we and what role do you have to play? I'm aware of time, and so let me just finish with the final couple of paragraphs. Over the last 45-50 minutes, we've thought about our charities and networks in association, about receptivity, about reimagination. Let me finish very simply with some thoughts on renegotiation. I think it's fair to say for the landscape for charities is a complex and changing one. Many larger Christian charities are restructuring, having to make redundancies. A number of smaller charities, I'm the trustee for 3 charities, are having to shut down because there's lack of funding. And yet some charities are acting in some contexts essentially as the welfare state. They're providing local services that national or local government in all reality should be responsible for. The truth is, some of our member churches are growing dramatically, and tomorrow we'll hear from the Bible Society about the quiet revival. Others are struggling to keep local churches open, are having to reconceive or renegotiate their futures. Regardless, I think churches and charities have an absolutely fundamental role to play in the coming years. In a world where people are increasingly failing to see each other, where polarization is becoming normal, where people are trapped in their own little silos or obsessing over their own little algorithms, the work of churches together in bringing churches and charities together for mutual understanding and listening, to be able to hear someone else you may profoundly disagree with, is absolutely vital. If we cannot listen to one another and love one another, if we cannot confront issues like Christian nationalism or the growing inequality between the richest and the poorest, if we cannot confront the pain of those who feel ignored and forgotten by the state, those who are concerned about the failure of leadership both within and outside the church, if we cannot listen and we cannot learn and we cannot love, we do not have very much to say to the world. In the coming years, we have an opportunity to work more closely together as member churches and charities to see God's kingdom come. Amen.
Amen.